Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Badger for the week ending December 10th, 2016. Here, thanks to our stealthy poll cats, we ferret out the best feels, funnies. Oh, wait a minute, that's the wrong intro, I'm sorry. Here, thanks to our privileged straight cis men who are trying to work off the guilt from their crimes of historical and felony oppression, we have compiled a collection of funny, interesting, and hopefully useful clips from our most watched shows. Enjoy the spoils of their hard work. In Polecat Cast number 91, we talk about the news of the week, including dodging justice, testosterone killing cancer, and Trainwreck Barbie.
If he is really the victim, he has done himself a huge disservice by not showing up.
Oh, that was.
I mean, I know it sucks. But it's like, you know what? The court is they're gonna see this, and they're gonna already have a bias against him because of this. Even after the fact, if he proves in court, they're still going to be like, well, you didn't show up, so your probation. Obviously, at this point, his probation is probably remanded, and he's going to get the full sentence now. So he's kind of fucked himself pretty good, man. I mean, it kind of sucks because if he really was the victim, the court's not going to take kindly to him having done what he's done, even if he was actually the victim. So it's a bad move on his part.
This is the wrong way to handle when authority is in the wrong. It's the wrong way to handle it, and it's this way, especially with any government entity, whether it's the court or whether it is an agency that has authority over a particular area of business that you do. And I'm going to compare this to something completely unrelated. I worked with a food service agency or industry that had a new thing. They had to get approval from the agency over food safety. I can't think of it off the top of my head. The health department, duh. Anyway, they had to get approval from the health department for this new thing they were doing. One store out of over 1,000 stores rolled out a few hours early, and the agency found out, and they came in to all of the stores that were rolling this out the next day and nitpicked things that they never call companies on, that are technical fouls, essentially, that they should be calling companies on because it's part of the policy and the law, or they should be taking them out of the policy and the law. But because this one store bucked their authority, they were offended, and this is how they responded. Court systems are 1,000 times worse.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy, he just fucked himself.
The short version of Senate Bill 188 outlaws the practice of posting naked photos of a lover or partner on the internet without their permission with a specific intent, which is in quotes, and I think that's the tricky part, to humiliate that person or ruin that person's reputation. In this particular case, the story is that she was filmed, like they filmed each other with consent, but he posted it on the internet after they broke up or around that time, and it was without her consent, and that's why it sort of, that's why he was accused and convicted of this crime.
As far as the production of content, this is one of the pitfalls of working with people in the production of content, and it's pretty standard if you're in the industry of image production, using live models in any way, even the most mundane thing. Like if I wanted to run an ad campaign to sell 3-pronged widgets, and I wanted to have an individual holding a 3-pronged widget in my ad, I would have a contract. I would have a release form for that. When I worked with a wedding photography business, we had a contract for every single wedding. And in every single contract, it said that we have the legal right to use pictures from those weddings in our portfolio that we show prospective customers. And everybody had to read and sign that so that nobody could sue us for showing their wedding pictures to prospective couples that were looking at us for their wedding photographers. And the same thing with senior portraits for the yearbook, for your high school yearbook and stuff like that. That kind of thing would, that's just for completely innocent, no strings attached, no, anybody getting judged over anything by prudes for doing it. photography. And if you're doing something where somebody might come out later and say, I'm really embarrassed to have been involved in that and I didn't consent to it, that just makes the CYA protocol that much bigger. And anybody who gets involved in this should know that. You know, even if you're doing amateur, even if you're like the most amateur participant ever, you've never done anything with video or photography or anything before, and you're a complete and utter virgin when you start, you still should know you have to cover your ass. You have to have a contract. You have to have things in writing. And you don't do anything that wasn't consented to in writing. And it's stupid to do otherwise. But we don't know whether he had a contract or not because there's nothing said in any news article that I could find about whether there was anything in writing. In a way, this does make sense because prostate cancer, usually prostate and testicular cancers hit in older men, not younger men. You don't see very many 18-year-olds with them. And it may be that, you know, as men get older, their testosterone production does reduce, and it may be that that is a contributing factor to the development of these types of cancers. So it may be that significantly reversing that reduction might be a treatment. Yeah. It's obviously going to take a lot more research to find out, but I just gotta say, but my toxic masculinity.
You know what?
But my testosterone poisoning.
So what you're saying, Hannah, is that feminism is cancer, and the only cure for it is masculinity. Men of this generation, of the most current generation, have more. I want to say they have less testosterone than men from previous generations. And everyone has more estrogen in it. Not that estrogen and testosterone are necessarily like, you know, a zero-sum game of checks and balances. But I wonder if where we are today in terms of how much of these chemicals we have in our system is actually contributing to a rise or a decrease or an effect on the number of people that are, you know, a number of men that have prostate cancer. And unfortunately, I think the fact that it is a cancer that doesn't get as much attention as, say, breast cancer, not by a large margin. Right. It's not an easy question to find the answer to, but that's just something I was just thinking about. Like, I wonder if there's more prostate cancer today, and part of it has to do with the fact that there's less testosterone in men.
Well, you know about the what is it? What is it? The thing that they used to line, or they still line cans with BPA, I think it is.
Like aluminum cans?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's different types of cans, but it's a lining. I think it's called BPA. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but apparently there was some studies going on that was showing a link between BPA and rising estrogen levels in men. And this is a chemical that they use in plastics, plastic bottles like soda bottles. They use it in lining, aluminum cans and food cans and things like that. So it's something that's pretty common within our society, and I granted, again, I'm having a vague recollection of this, and this is something I read probably within the last year or so. But there was a link between BPA and rising levels of estrogen in men.
Yeah,
so,
BPA what might be a bigger contributing factor to rising levels of estrogen is the fact that medications that people take do not get 100% absorbed by the body. So when you go to the bathroom, it comes out into the water system, and there are actually, and that doesn't get filtered out either in the water treatment plants. There are studies that have shown that there are detectable levels of both antidepressants because they're so widely prescribed, and birth control drugs because they're so widely prescribed and widely used in our water system. Not necessarily high levels, but who knows what effect that has on people.
It's detectable, so it's a high enough, so that should be worrying to people.
Right. And that's something that really, we don't know what that causes. We don't have any idea whether, like, that's actually increasing anything in people or not. because it's not as anywhere near as high as the dose if you were to actually take the medication itself. So, but the other thing is the increase in the incidence of prostate cancer might be similar to the increase in the incidence of autism, in that today there's a great deal more awareness and there's a great deal more people actually getting checked for it. And there's also a great deal more concern over it, where it's treated as an issue, even if there's just a small amount of symptoms, rather than it having to be something dramatic before it gets diagnosed. So the increase might not so much be an increase in incidence as it is an increase in detection as well. That may be a contributing factor. But the good thing is having a treatment available that wasn't available before, that looks very promising, and clearly it needs more investigation before it's confirmed. But having a treatment come along is a great thing, especially now that it is more detectable. Now that we're finding out more people who have it, it's better to be able to do something about it.
Yeah.
One other thing too could be that there's a lot of soy in our food now. And soy products have estrogen in them as well. U.S., they grow soybeans is like right up there with their corn in terms of how much we grow, and it's in a lot of our food.
If I understand right, though, it's not that there's estrogen in soy. It's that soy triggers the production of estrogen.
It triggers the production of estrogen. That's what
I know I'm triggered by soy.
Maybe that's why I'm such a giant
That's
pussy.
an allergy.
Because I'm a vegetarian and I eat a lot of soy, and I'm a gigantic pussy.
Well, you can substitute soy. I wouldn't recommend it. I'd probably try to get if you can find almond substitutes or something else.
Oh yeah, no.
For whatever.
I eat a
it
bunch
is.
of different stuff.
Yeah.
I eat a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, because soy isn't as good for us as they would let you believe. So, but anyway, that's
right. If soy is going to increase your estrogen, it is much better to eat your nuts.
Oh God!
I don't know what that means.
Is vegan,
but I'm guessing
just
that.
Saying.
I don't know what that means, but I'm guessing Tom Ford has opinions about that too.
If they decided to make a Cars-style movie about Hot Wheels cars, they would not, for instance, have Bill Cosby voice one of those cars.
Right?
And it doesn't matter whether he did what he was accused of or not. Just his having been accused would knock him out of the running.
Yeah, just like Hulk Hogan.
Yeah,
right,
with the WWE.
Yeah, even though he's done. He's not going to be in the WWE, at least not for many, many years. Like Mel Gibson, he had to disappear from the spotlight for a while after that phone call.
And to be honest, even though he came back, people haven't forgotten it.
Nope.
His comeback is tainted by that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going away. But here's Schumer, and she did the same thing sober that Brock Turner did while drunk. And the only contrasts are that in her speech where she described what she did, Amy Schumer not only admitted it, whereas Turner did not admit everything in his testimony in court. Schumer admitted it and made fun of her victim. She ridiculed his performance and cited it as a reason why she had an epiphany that her self-esteem shouldn't be coming from whether or not this guy wanted to have sex with her. Well, her choice to have sex with him shouldn't have been based on consent that was given while drunk and not verbally. This is, if they're going to say that's rape when it's done to a woman, it's rape when it's done to a man. It's rape when it's done by a woman. Amy Schumer should be considered a rapist for having done it, and she should be getting the same treatment as a man would get. Because you can't have two standards. You can't have a standard for women and a different standard for men.
Well, Hannah, if I may, such a standard already exists when it comes to men turning 18 and legally being required to sign up for selective service. So these standards, these double standards do exist in many facets of our life.
That they exist is not justification.
I know, but I'm just saying, though, it's like these things do exist, and they are, and it's just kind of seen as, oh, that's just the way it is. and that's fucking really dumb.
Yeah, and it should not be just the way it is.
Yeah, I know.
And that's
Absolutely.
something that, you know, this is something that people should be writing to the companies about. This is something that Sony should be hearing about. This is something that Mattel should be hearing about. The person behind one of their favorite characters find out as a kid that the person behind one of their favorite characters has done something reprehensible. And yeah, I know he did do something that offended people. He started trying to bring back family values, as Cameron James said, to the black community, which is like this that's a cardinal sin to liberals. But I think that may be why he was targeted if he's innocent of the things that he's being accused of.
The Barbie movie, it doesn't appear to me, I guess we'll wait and see, but it doesn't seem to me that they're aiming it at children, little girls. I think they're aiming it at adults that grew up on Barbie that probably are just looking for this, because I don't know that a girl would, the message, the story's message is that if let's say Schumer gets cast for the role, she is playing a Barbie that is eccentric because she doesn't fit in with the others, and it's a body positive message at the end of the day. And it's probably also got to do with, you know, traditional sort of views on what femininity is and behavior and all that. And because Amy Schumer sort of like, that's her sort of persona. She is like the unconventional, sexually liberated, overweight, grouchy, you know, woman. That's her archetype. So they're basically taking her and saying, well, she may not seem like the perfect woman to you, but she is the perfect woman to herself. And that's what matters.
I feel like breaking into a course of I'm Every Woman.
Yeah. I'm speculating, so we'll see. But that's my prediction. Yeah. My prediction is that this movie will be PG-13 at least, or if not, PG or PG-13 at least, if not even more adult in nature. And it will be taking the piss out of all of the sort of conventional Barbie stuff. And at the end of the day, it's about body positivity, it's about image, it's about all this stuff. And the ironic thing is, this goes back to the adulting school. If this is the case, then it's basically aimed at an audience that should have grown out of this shit a long time ago. And basically just sort of, they need to smoke a bowl, relax, and realize that Barbie is not something that they're supposed to live up to in the way that they think it is. It's supposed to be something that you enjoy. Like, boys don't play with Hot Wheels, and then when they grow up, they're like, damn, I'm so upset that I couldn't afford a fucking Trans Am. Or a Shelby fucking Viper, Cobra, whatever. Yeah, Shelby Cobra or a Viper or something. They're just like, cars are cool.
As bad as this is, our society is celebrity obsessed.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter is, when you look at it, people listen to celebrities. They go to them as beacons of truth or beacons that, you know, they're like, oh, well, this person said that, so, you know. Especially
the ones they like, because if they decide they don't like you, then
bias.
Yeah, it's different.
Right. There's a very strong bias. But the fact is, though, like if somebody is coming into a situation and talking about ideas and presenting an educated stance on those, and they're not, like you guys said, like Hannah said, they're not just saying, oh, well, don't like this person because they're bad. You know, that's fucking ridiculous. Everybody should realize that. Like if they're bringing tangible assets to the conversation, if they're bringing a studied, somewhat learned approach to what they're trying to say, then get involved, get into the process. Like everybody has the ability to be a voice. You know, you can get, like what we're doing. We are being a voice right now. You know, sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, but we're trying though. We're trying to, you know, open discourse. We're trying to, you know, bring ideas to the forefront and share them with people. So regardless of who you are, you know, the fact is the arguments will stand or fall on their own merits. If somebody is saying dumb shit like Affleck said on Politically Incorrect, people called him out, and rightfully so, because he was verifiably, unequivocally wrong. He looked like a fucking idiot, you know, and no amount of celebrity is going to save him from looking like a dipshit. So yeah, people whoever they are should be involved if they want to be involved, but you gotta, you know, it is up to the citizenry, to the consumer, to the average Joe or Jane. To verify this information and not just take it at face value.
Just because somebody is famous and we like them does not exempt us as your average Joes from scrutinizing their statements.
Yep.
We are still responsible for whether or not we just buy into something because somebody we like said it. And at the other end of it, being famous does not exempt you from being rational. Even if, you're somebody like Britney Spears, who is now more famous for being irrational than for music. And this is one of those things where you cannot just let these things get the way they are now without consequences. And the consequences for that are that we end up with people who are irrational telling us who to vote for. And in the long run, that will lead to bad leadership. So, it's your job. Everybody that's listening, it's your job to scrutinize everybody who's famous, whether they're like real, actual famous, like television or movies or music or whatever, or whether it's just,
internet famous,
celebrity, like
Casey Neistat.
People call me famous. There's I don't even have that many subscribers on YouTube. I'm probably one of the smallest channels in the men's rights movement that's actually got enough followers to be excited about. But anybody who considers themselves a fan of us, I always say, I've said it repeatedly, and I'll always say it, you should scrutinize the things we say too. And none of us should be taken as gospel. It should always be something that you hear what we say and you do your own research. This is great, because here we have these left-wing publications coming out with this hit list, right, of fake news organizations, and it's all news organizations that they disagree with ideologically. And they want these organizations to be denied advertising and denied a platform because they disagree with them ideologically. And now they're bitching that they're being censored because they think they're not going to have access that they feel entitled to the president. And I'm sorry, but if you're going to have a standard, then you need to live by it. And they're not living by it. They're not encouraging free discourse. They're not encouraging, open discourse and free speech. They're wanting to say that people in power should have the right to silence opposing viewpoints. Now they're getting a taste of their own medicine, even though they're not even really being silenced. They're simply being told off. But at the other end of it, I do hope that Trump's administration is not actually going to shut journalists out. Even if they are liars, they can correct the record. They can say these guys are liars, but censorship doesn't fix anything.
If the liberal media wants to, put their bias in, they should be welcome to do that if that's really what they want to do. But they should be transparent about the fact that they do have a bias. At the very least, if we can stop pretending like they don't, then at least then people will know what they're getting. Ideally, it would be good if they were unbiased, or at least attempted to be unbiased. Milo believes that that's not possible. I think it is. I think that you can, at least try to present both sides, or you can do it another way. Like you could, for example, if you're going to do opinion pieces, bring in, multiple people that have different opinions, or they come from different sides, or whatever.
It will be a bad thing. It will absolutely be a bad thing if the White House starts shutting out media on the basis of ideological disagreement. There is no good in that.
And we got to hold them accountable if that happens.
Right. That has to be. They have to be accountable for that. They cannot just do that. At the same time, the fact that looks like it might be a possibility, even a remote possibility, I'm glad if it scares the shit out of the journalists and the left-wing politicians that have been trying to give themselves the power to do that. Then I hope it scares these people into saying, well, wait a minute, no, we shouldn't do this to anybody. It shouldn't be done. Let's back off of things that involve censorship, and just people are allowed to talk, and we're allowed to disagree with them, and they're allowed to disagree with us, and the whole discussion should happen. He may get better about his speaking simply because he may turn around and hire some advisors to help him with his political speech and his public image. That's because that's what men in business do. If they have an area where they have a weakness as far as their performance or their knowledge, they seek advice. They don't just, at least when they're successful, men that are successful look for information on how to do better at what they want to be successful at, and they use it.
I hope he's open to that, honestly, Hannah, because, like you said, if he fails, we fail collectively.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I mean, there's already obviously a very big divide about this situation, about the presidential election, and we can't. I don't know that we can't afford something bad to happen. Mm-hmm. I've been saying this for like the last 6-7 months. I'm kind of like, fuck it. If Trump gets in, I think it's gonna show a spotlight on a lot of the things that are fucked up with not only our media but our election process and this, that, and the other. So I think in one regard this is good, but I think Trump has to be more savvy than he has shown himself to be. He has shown himself to have a short temper, short fuse, and just kind of not be very chill. Like I said, he doesn't really have any chill, and to be in that position, to be dealing with world stage politics, this is not The fucking Apprentice, and that's the thing that kind of worries me is his interactions on that level.
On Doge and Buddy number 4, Teal Deer joins us as we examine a study which finds that sexist men who practice typical masculine behavior actually have psychological problems, which mean that all men who practice semi-masculine behavior have psychological problems. Sexist men have psychological problems. I'll read a bit of this and then we'll look at the study. A psychologist looking at 10 years of data from nearly 20,000 men found that those who value having power over women and endorse playboy behavior and other traditional notions of masculinity, note the language here, are more likely to suffer from psychological problems and less likely to seek out help. Turns out that cultural norms that hurt half of society's members aren't too good for the other half either. Who'd have thunk it? The new meta-analysis, which was published Monday in the Journal of Counseling Psychology, synthesized 78 studies on masculinity and mental health gathered between 2003 and 2013. The participants ranged in age from 12 to over 65, and the vast majority were men. A little more than half of the studies involved predominantly white men, although some focused on African Americans or Asian Americans. Most of the studies did not ask respondents' sexual orientation, but among those that did, most of the participants were straight. Researchers then identified 11 norms considered to be traditionally masculine: desire to win, need for emotional control, risk-taking, violence, dominance, sexual promiscuity or playboy behavior, self-reliance, primacy of work, power over women, disdain for homosexuality, and pursuit of status, and looked to see whether they were associated with particular mental health outcomes. Note that all these 11 norms that are considered to be traditionally masculine are actually things that feminists describe as toxic masculinity: desire to win, need for emotional control, risk-taking, violence, dominance, sexual promiscuity, playboy behavior, self-reliance, primacy of work, power over women, disdain for homosexuality, and pursuit of status. In general, the men who struck more strongly to these norms were more likely to experience problems such as depression, stress, body image issues, substance abuse, and negative social functioning. They were also less likely to turn to counseling to help deal with those problems. The effect was particularly strong for men who emphasized playboy behavior, power over women, and self-reliance. Lead author Y. Joel Wong of Indiana University was not surprised by the results. It's not rocket science, he told Popular Science. It's something that's been demonstrated over 20 years of research. A growing group of psychologists are interested in studying toxic masculinity, the idea that some traditional ideas, apparently all of them, according to what you guys listed, some traditional ideas about how men should behave are harmful to men, women, and society overall. The point is not to demonize men, Somebody wants what? Bunny? No, nobody.
No, I
Okay.
was coughing and making notes, and I don't want to interrupt you
Oh, I
because
see.
you're on a streak.
Okay.
I honestly do mute wherever possible so I don't interrupt.
Oh no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
The point is not to demonize men or the attributes some of them possess. It's more to understand how behaviors encouraged in men can be damaging for everyone involved. For example, one of the studies, and note that the link here, this is the study we're going to look at, cited in Wong's analysis, looked at 108 men who had been referred to a program for committing domestic violence. These men were disproportionately likely to embrace the norms of dominance and emotional control, as well as to say that men shouldn't share their emotions or ask for help. The authors of that study theorized that men with these values are more likely to take out anger and frustration on their partners rather than appear weak by seeking emotional support.
You're going into this looking for a specific outcome that cannot be balanced by a comparable outcome for analysis. So to me, that immediately puts the feather in the heart off balance, and you get eaten by the crocodile. So going into this, I'm already like,
Yeah.
you got to be real careful here, guys.
What you're saying is, what we're looking at is, it's an equation, and only one half of the equation is actually filled in, and the other half is completely ignored.
Oh, that's exactly my point. You have to balance the equation. And when you get into this and you start looking at the CMNI, that's the conformity to masculine norms inventory that is often referenced in here. They talk about risk-taking behavior in men, such as drinking to excess. But I don't see a lot of research going into women drinking to excess and the destructive results they may have. Oh, wait, because women still get a pass when they drink too much. And nobody wants to look at that, I think, because there is this men evil, women, well, we're children, right? So we know not what we do. And for me to take any sort of research like this seriously, I need to see opposing evidence.
The article is basically saying things which are not in this study at all.
Mm-hmm.
They have sort of taken a reading of it which is completely different from what the data actually indicates. One thing which I find very interesting is in this article they actually stick in brackets the term toxic masculinity and toxic and all these things. These words don't actually exist in this study. Toxic masculinity is not referenced in this study once. The word toxic is not in this study at all. You can word search it. The only time you find the word toxic is in the word intoxication, which was a study looking at drinking rates.
Yep.
That's it. So you can already see how the Washington Post has kind of manipulated what's being said here. And then what I find really sort of interesting and actually a little bit dishonest on their part here is they were sort of talking about the meta-analysis, and then like halfway through they sort of suddenly tangent from one example of one of the studies cited, and then they look at a case of domestic violence. Like they're kind of like then separating that one thing out from the actual meta-analysis. And then it's kind of like, so people who are violent disproportionately think that they can be violent towards people. Fucking duh.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, people who are violent think it's okay to be violent.
Yeah.
Color me surprised. Neil 2012 found strong evidence that masculinity-related constructs are positively associated with psychological problems across diverse samples of men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Now that kind of stood out to me, and we'll see why when we actually go and look at the things. It's in these meta-analyses looking at masculinity-related traits, you're measuring women. One thing which I find really, really interesting is in the positively correlated examples later on, looking at the proportion of the results that they found relative to the studies, you are going to have found women who were exhibiting those traits and therefore being negatively affected by them as well. So calling them masculine traits therefore seems to be somewhat a misnomer, because clearly they are exhibited by women and clearly they are then negatively affecting those women as well. So why are these traits, what makes them inherently masculine?
Exactly.
It seems that what makes them masculine is simply the assertion of the person who has labeled these things masculine. You should probably just be looking at them and saying, what kind of behaviors have potentially damaging outcomes?
Oh, because but we got into this with them.
Because throughout this study, they find these things, and they find some of them have damaging things, but other times they have positive correlations as well. So they're kind of all over the place with this a little bit. They kind of eke it down in a way that they get what they want out of it, and I think
Exactly.
it's a bit misleading and dishonest.
You can take any trait and expand it and exaggerate it to extremes that would be considered in the realm of mental illness. I mean, any trait. You can take fucking altruism and take it to an extreme, and then you've got a martyr complex. So to me, studies like this they don't have there's nothing for me to hang my hat on or sink my teeth into, because I can do that with any trait. I can do that with anything.
Yeah.
I can do that with nurturing. I can do it with collecting. I can do it with cleanliness. I can do it with grooming. Like, yeah.
I mean, you can make the argument, if you wanted to, that if Teal'c's translation of what power over women is could be, where you have men that seek, higher status because women tend to be attracted to men who have higher status, you could even make the argument that that's actually women's power over men, to make them chase things that may be outside of their interests in order to find something or have a better chance with something that is. So yeah, I mean, this power over women thing is a really sketchy phrase. Besides, do women who have because if they were testing women for traits of toxic masculine traits, and would they also have power over women as one of the things? Would women do that to other women?
Oh, they wouldn't include that.
No, of course not.
No, that wouldn't be.
Of course
included.
not.
One thing I would point out, actually, really quickly before we move on about this,
Mm-hmm.
these three traits which they're picking out as being the ones which have the highest correlation to mental and psychological problems. Throughout this paper, I at no point found anything about a fail state. Because if you're failing at having a social status that you desire, if you're failing in, Playboy, if you want to take multiple partners and you're failing, if you're failing at being self-reliant, as in you're dependent on other people, that's going to cause people to have mental illnesses and mental problems. That's the sort of stuff which can lead to things like depression and alcoholism. So it's not the traits themselves which have caused that, it's failure to acquire them. So if you acquired them, would you still have that problem? Potentially, but potentially not. So
That's a
they
good point.
they seem to have completely missed out of this study the concept of a fail state, because a fail state can cause these problems as well. It's not necessarily the trait; it's the journey towards the trait.
When people are really self-reliant, that doesn't just mean
Which
that
is a
they're
bad
less.
thing.
Yeah, that doesn't just mean that they're less dependent. It also means that they tend to be just fine alone. They don't necessarily care about their social status as much. It's not as big a deal to them. They're less concerned with that because they're happy in their being alone or with a small group of people or what have you. So.
Yeah, can we just point out again for people who've just tuned in that self-reliance in this particular study is being considered a negative thing?
Yes.
A negative masculine thing? Self-reliance, it's bad, guys.
It's toxic, apparently.
It's toxic. Wow.
Being an individual. And I think the reason is because feminism is, and I know I'm going back to this, but I do think that feminism is definitely playing a factor in this. It is a collectivist ideology. Mm-hmm. So if you're not part of the collective, then something is wrong. You're not thinking about everybody else.
Do you remember when the scientific process was to go against other people and try and discover new things? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, I remember.
Do you remember? I remember.
That is good old time.
Anyway, continue. Please.
Those were the old days.
I feel so old now.
I know. I'm right there with you.
We found only one, and the mean is claimed to be Cooper 2017. Maybe that's a different paper. I'm not sure, because that's the citation. Only
Cooper 2017.
Yeah.
So he publishes it next year.
Yeah, I'll give you the mean next year. Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We're referencing papers that clearly don't even exist yet because it's from 20. Are you fucking serious? You're referencing something from next year. I assume it's already been accepted and just hasn't actually been. I assume it's been written and accepted, but just hasn't actually gone into
perhaps
actual paper.
You can't look at it yet.
Journal yet.
Yeah. Citation predicted.
I want.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to find that. I'm sorry. I'm going to be a while. I'm going to try and track this down.
Okay.
That's
I'll keep
that's
reading in the
remarkably
meantime.
common.
I've just
Yeah.
searched it up. It's a book which seems to not exist yet. Hang on, no research. Anthony Harris Cooper. No, it's a paperback that was published back actually in the 2000s. I don't know why they've stuck 2017 next to it.
That is weird.
I don't understand. What the fuck am I looking at?
It's a glitch in the matrix.
Possibly.
I just had deja vu.
Exactly.
It
Again.
happens when
Oh
they
my
change
God.
something.
What I'm wondering is that the difference between seeking professional help, like a therapist or a psychologist or whatever, or just, maybe participating in some activity with friends in order to help, that's not professional, basically. Or maybe even like going to see your priest or, your coach or whatever, something else, basically.
I know someone who deals with their depression, a man, by carving things and getting them installed at bars. Like he carves bar tops and he carves old school chair backs and stuff. And he gives them to bars. And it gives him a tremendous focus and pleasure seeing people enjoy what he's put his time and effort into. And that's how he copes. I would consider that psychological self-help,
Yeah.
So, but it's not. It's not because you have to sit and you have to talk about how you wet the bed when you were 2, and that's what happened. You can't actually focus on results, can you? And yeah, it makes me crazy because so many people are not getting help for what they need.
Yeah,
Men
that's true.
specifically. When you look at emotional control, I do think that men naturally have different emotional responses to things. Even look at our tear ducts, right? This has already been established. However, how many men have an artificially imposed emotional control because they're told their feelings aren't important? And that isn't even touched on here. How many men have learned to have emotional control because nobody fucking cares anyway? And that would be my question in my mind. If that is related to negative mental health outcomes, well, I think you're looking at the wrong end of the horse. Because you're looking at the result, the symptom, but you're not looking at the cause.
We're looking at a study that there's not much that's very useful here, and it's not necessarily like they tested women as well as men, and they found that these. I think that there's a lot of problems here. First off, this 11 dimension of conformity to masculine norms. That's like, I don't know that that's good science there all by itself, because a lot of the traits, as we talked about before, are things that women also do. Especially these days. I think that's even more common. I wonder how old this 11 dimensions of conformity to masculine norms is as a concept, and if it doesn't need to be revisited. Because that actually is likely the thing that the Washington Post and Christy Winters was holding on to use as evidence of why toxic masculinity and the patriarchy is the problem. And not that, this is stuff that this is a human thing. And yes, they tend to be things that men do more, but they're not male. Like men don't own this kind of behavior.
Yeah.
So
They're not inherently gendered behaviors by any stretch of the imagination. They're taking human behaviors which, yes, are predominant in perhaps one gender more than another,
Yeah.
but then they are using a behavioral preponderance in certain groups to then state that is basically then a function of biology, which no. That there are biological bases for preponderance in behavior, but they haven't established this link between these to that.
it was one of the comments that Skeptor made under the original article. So I'm going to give credit to Skeptor here because he did make a mention. Now, I don't know that Skeptor looked at the study, but he did read the article. And he said that the way the article frames it, you could say that 100% of people who like to eat cheese have killed themselves in the shower. So, but that doesn't mean that eating cheese leads to slipping and killing yourself in the shower. And so that this is, I mean, this is what this is pretty suspect, you know. And I'm glad that the people who made the study were honest enough to point that out. I don't know that the people who made this were maybe they didn't have an agenda per se, but they're probably working with some pretty faulty stuff, like the 11 dimensions of masculine norms list.
I don't think they have an agenda. I think they're just working with what they've got, and then realizing that what they've got is very limited, which is why they are basically saying, what we've got here is a bunch of correlation. That's it. It might not be linked in any way whatsoever. Or it might be like a third or fourth variable, because they even say, look, we don't have access to the original things to play around with the variables. So it might be like a third or fourth thing that is actually causing the correlation, and that once you normalize for it or remove it or factor something in, it'll go away.
Yeah.
So they're basically saying it's not that this study is completely worthless. It isn't. It's just a stepping stone. Well, no, it's a stepping stone towards another thing. Like even studies where you end up like this. It's like, okay, I've got a load of correlation. Well, okay, I know there's a load of correlation. The next time I revisit this, I can attempt to work out what variables we need to change. You know, you can start looking at the individual studies and testing more validity of it, and hopefully eventually find out that what you're saying is complete nonsense.
But that's the problem, is we've got correlations based on citations to correlations, based on citations to correlations, and there's nothing challenging these things.
And there's no control.
And there's no control, and there's nothing challenging it in a head-to-head academic arena.
I don't believe that any culture that's organized under a strict sort of authoritarian, religious, theological, authoritarian construct is particularly masculine. I think that because it's not necessarily driven by that. But Teal, what did you want to chime in on into these muddy waters?
Pretty much. Oh, they're not muddy waters for me. We all know my opinion of Islam. It goes something along the lines of the words cancer and purge. But,
because nobody's ever asked me on any stream ever what my thoughts are, and I thought that was deliberate on their part, saving their channel subs, because it's something that I'm actually quite passionate about. But okay, good.
That's fine, but I would agree. It as a culture, it is not masculine. It's just one which observes very sort of quite strict gendered boundaries, but within their own domains, each of the genders do wield quite a significant amount of power. I mean, you consider, for instance, that like one of the things that Islam very much encourages is, while they sort of say, oh, women must be beholden unto their husbands and all of that sort of stuff, there's also actually a line in the Quran, which I really wish I memorized, but I didn't, which is basically something along the lines of, no, a woman only has to be faithful to her husband so long as he is a true Muslim.
Oh, and all she has to do is find someone who will say her husband is not faithful to Allah, and then all of a sudden she does not. And he can also encounter trouble from his peers if his wife and wives, potentially, and daughters are not perceived as faithful. He can actually be beaten, and then that gets passed on to them. So, but how tremendously aggravating and stressful is it to be fully responsible for every single member of your household? The whisper memes and shit say we want guys who ask us how we're feeling. We don't. Okay, not
just
every
girly
5 seconds.
Things.
Yeah. Just no. And a lot of us like once in a while for you to order dinner for me. You know, or for us, you know, just do it. Just order dinner for me, and we'll see what happens, right? And it's very dominant, and it can be very sexy. And I need a minute. Okay, no. But these are not things that are oppressive or harassing, but they are now considered toxic. So I'm seeing more women going to the fetish community for even a small slice of male dominance. And we're also seeing women going to traditionally machismo cultures looking for that as well. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be cuck or I will make you my third wife. You know, there is that happy medium in between. And for me, all it means is letting men be men and not getting offended every single time a man maybe looks at your tits. If a guy doesn't look at my tits, even instinctively for like 1 second, I'm like, that was odd. Because it's such, I don't even know if men realize they do it, but it's an automatic thing. It's like, I look at hands and shoes and eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hands, shoes, eyes, I know everything I need to know about you. And most men I interact with, they do the quick flick down and then up to my eyes again. And if they don't do that, I'm like, are you trying hard, or are you gay? Or, because that's an instinctive, like, animal sniffing each other's butts thing. I'm not at a high level or anything, but a lot of the experiments I do, because I go in as blind as possible, I really do try and adhere to, like, the let's just see what happens. And a lot of times it does not prove my hypothesis, and I'm like, no, okay. Yeah, but as long as you're honest about it,
which is still like, well, this is what actually happened. I wonder if I can use this for something.
Thank you. And that gives you your next experiment, doesn't it? Because then you go, these are the variables I need to change. So let's do this independent variable, this dependent variable. Let's change these parameters. Let's try it again, and maybe we'll get something. And that is how you build a body of data on actual trying shit. Right? And not knowing if it's going to work. I said
this paper isn't complete garbage, because it's basically just said, we found a load of correlation. There is no way of proving causation or even any particular link. There's a shitload of variables that they have absolutely no idea about, but, you know, this could be the first study in a long line of 20 or 30 studies that eventually turns up something useful. But this thing by itself, if you're making any definite statements based on something in this paper, you're doing it wrong.
Moving on then to Honey Badger Radio number 79, where we talk to Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, Hero, about free speech, pronouns, and identity politics.
You could imagine that your identity is the consequence of two forces. Taking the individual out of the argument for a minute, your biological substrate and your socio-cultural surroundings. And you can argue lucidly, generally speaking, that identity has a biological element, and you can argue lucidly that it has a socio-cultural element, and then you can debate about the degree to which each of those things influences a given element of identity. And that would be the argument, say, between the biologists and the evolutionary biologists, evolutionary psychologists, and so on the biological end, and then the more social constructionists, social scientists, and humanities types on the social end. But the legislation goes even farther than the social constructionists, who would argue that your identity is only a consequence of socialization. It says your identity is essentially nothing but your subjective choice moment to moment, and refuses to include the possibility of social negotiation or biological substrate underneath that. And it's the most puerile and narrow-minded and shallow conception of human identity that you could possibly imagine, and now it's instantiated as a necessary belief according to our legal establishment. So it's unbelievable that it's happened. I can't believe that it's happened, and it's hard for people to understand why it's significant, because the bill looks merely like it's something good for an oppressed minority, you know, at a casual glance, and then to understand what the bill really means, you have to look at the Ontario Human Rights Commission website, and then you have to understand the philosophy that's being instantiated in the legislation. But basically the philosophy is that there's no such thing as objective reality. There's no such thing as social reality. Your identity is whatever you want it to be from moment to moment. And if anybody dares challenge that, then they're engaging in a hate crime. And, well, I just can't believe that that's the case. I can't believe that that's happened, but it has. People who are at different poles of the political spectrum are different sorts of people. So, for example, liberals are high in trait openness, and openness is basically the creativity / interest in ideas dimension of the Big Five. The Big Five is the classic comprehensive personality model. And so liberal people tend to be high in openness and in interest in ideas. And so they like fiction, and they like art, and they like movies, and their thinking tends to be associative. You know, one idea will trigger off a bunch of other ideas. But they also tend to be low in conscientiousness. And then the classic conservative is someone who's high in conscientiousness, so they're industrious and orderly, dutiful, somewhat judgmental. They're judgmental with regards to moral transgressions frequently, and they're low in openness. And so and I think the fundamental axis, the reason for that, because I've wondered, well, why do openness and conscientiousness clump together to make up the major political dimension? And here's what I think it is, and I think this is a really exciting idea, is that the fundamental political difference between people is how open they think borders should be. And it's not just borders between countries, it's borders at every level. And so conservative people think that sexual borders should be fairly high and well fortified, and that conceptual barriers should be high and well fortified, and that there's a place for everything and everything should stay in its place. And liberals, and that's both low openness and high orderliness that's driving that. And liberals say, no, we need to have the borders open so there can be a free flow of ideas, and that the danger that's associated with open borders, and that is that everything will fall apart, is trumped by the advantage, which is the free flow of information. And the truth of the matter is that you can't tell how open the borders should be. Sometimes they should be more open than they are, and sometimes they should be more closed than they are. And the way you figure that out is by having a dialogue between the liberals and the conservatives. And the democratic process is actually that process of dialogue, of endless dialogue, because it's not like one temperamental type is correct and the other temperamental type is wrong. They just represent different points on a continuum, and at different points in time, the appropriate solution is to be found at different points on the continuum. And so that's why the dialogue is so important. The PC authoritarians that I was debating with kept claiming that these laws were nowhere near as pernicious as they actually are. If I ever pushed them a little bit, then they would immediately show that I was correct in my, let's call them paranoid suppositions. So for example, I was on a TV program, TV Ontario, it's The Agenda with Steve Paikin, and we were talking about pronouns and gender identity, and there was a professor on there whose name is Nicholas Matt, and he said a couple of infamous things, but the first thing he said was that the scientific consensus
is a social construct.
Yes, he said sex. That's right. He said that there's no evidence that there's biological difference between men and women, and that's the scientific consensus. And that was just, both of those statements were mind-boggling. I mean, the first one is, it just renders you speechless. And the second one is, well, that is certainly not the scientific consensus. It's such an absurd statement that, but it shows you how viciously these people are going to go after the biologists, because obviously if that's the scientific consensus, then you have what are they going to be? Sociological deniers, like the climate deniers, something like that. But then, I kind of pushed him at one point to define what he thought I was doing, and he said I was abusing my students, and then I think Steve Paikin asked him if he thought that was violent, and he said yes. And I said, well, do you think that's abuse? Do you think it's violent abuse? And he said yes. And so like he would jump from misgendering to violent abuse in a second. And a friend of mine, I talked to a friend of mine about that. He's a very thoughtful person, and he said, well, there's a really horrible underground thing going on there too, because if the radical left is able to put forward their proposition that misspeaking is equivalent to physical violence, then that justifies the use of physical violence in pushing back against speech, and that's part of the motivation for producing that landscape of ideas. If your speech is equivalent to violence, then I'm justified in using violence to quote, defend myself. And then during the U of T debate, Mary Bryson also accused me of disseminating hate propaganda. And so the idea that these laws will be used to silence people who have opinions that are offensive, let's say, which is pretty much anybody's opinion that I don't agree with, when it comes down to the definitions. The probability that these laws are going to be used by people who are even more censorious than the people who originated them is 100%. the universities have been forced to develop very elaborate sexual harassment policies by Kathleen Wynne's government, because of course they're obsessed by rape culture as long as it is in the West and not in Saudi Arabia, let's say. But the universities and colleges have been forced to develop these extremely punitive sexual harassment policies and to implement quasi-judicial proceedings within themselves as institutions. And this sort of thing that you just described is just going to become unbelievably common, where, dopey, thing-oriented guys are going to make stupid, unsophisticated errors in their communication with hypersensitive, personality disordered social justice warriors in the vicinity. And, the universities are going to be flooded by complaints, and they're going to have to take on the burden of being the judiciary, in the absence of any real rule of law.
And they've eliminated the mens rea component. It is all actus reus is not an actual act. The wrongful act is the outcome. The outcome,
exactly.
And mens rea is no longer intent is no longer a consideration.
No, and that's grounded deeply in to my way of thinking, that's grounded deeply in the anti-patriarchy theories of the PC authoritarians, because part of English common law structure is part of the foundation of the patriarchy, and obviously that puts women who've been sexually assaulted at risk in an unfair way. And so obviously the thing to do with that is to throw out the entire English common law tradition, and who cares anyways, because it's just part of the corrupt patriarchy.
Oh, I would ask you to please use the appropriate term for that. It is the cis heteronormative white supremacist capitalist patriarchy.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, and so then why have any respect for any of its presuppositions when you can replace that with equality of outcome and with consequence? And I can't believe that they're replacing intent with consequence. I mean, that reverses like 6,000 years of civilization. The federal government decided now that if you're applying for a judiciary position, that you have to produce a dossier that documents your ethnic identity, and then the committee that's going to select you will have had to undergo anti-racism and anti-bias training. That was announced about 3 weeks ago.
Give it 5 years, and that will be they will add, how did you vote in the last 5 federal elections?
Yeah, right. Well, if you look at the policy statements in the Ontario Human Rights Commission website, you find that all of the things that you just described that you're concerned about, that's written right into the law. I mean, the harassment policies, for example, if you're harassing someone, that's all defined by the subjective consequences of your words. And, your employer is responsible as well as you for the unintended consequences of your words, just as if your employer is the one uttering the words. And so it can be accidental, non-intended. You don't even have to know about it if you're the employer to be liable. And as I said, the consequences can be unintended. And so the law couldn't possibly be written to be more vague and more comprehensive and more punitive than it is. My sense is that people in general are just as likely to be perpetrators as victims, let's say, in any given state of conflict. And unless you recognize in yourself the capacity to be a perpetrator, and you deeply recognize that, in which case you cease to assume that you necessarily hold the moral high ground, then the probability that you have good intentions is zero, because you don't regard yourself as a loaded weapon, and you are a loaded weapon. And one thing I've learned from studying totalitarianism is that the bulk of the evils that were committed by the Nazis and the Soviets were committed by ordinary, well-intentioned people. Now, I mean, they also pulled all sorts of malevolent psychopaths into their little pack of carnivores, but you can't blame the awful outcomes of Nazism and of the Soviet Union on obedience to orders, and you can't blame it on the acts of a small handful of malevolent people. It's the dangers that are in the heart of every single individual, and the whole good intention thing is, I think that's just if you believe that you're motivated by nothing but good intentions, then you're naive to the point of dangerousness.
We hope you enjoyed this clip show. If there was a clip from these shows you think we should have shown, please leave a comment on the video and include a timestamp. Thank you, and Badger on.